David Brewster here with another episode of Chordplay, and this is the chords of Meola. And Meola is a legendary, very unique and distinct guitarist. And I know when I first heard his music, I, kept seeing his name pop up in guitar magazines, and Eddie Van Halen and Steve Lukather and a whole bunch of people, mentioned his name, and I thought, who is Meola? And I was a kid, but I sought out, some of his music, bought a couple albums, and I had the same reaction that a lot of friends and, students that I've shared his music with over the years. I heard his music and, my head turned almost like a dog that hears, like a high pitched whistle. I was like, what in the world is that? And, if you're a rock fan or a metal player or a blues guitarist or country guitarist or something like that, his music is going to sound very different than what you're used to. Mainly because he comes from more of like a jazz, fusion, flamenco, classical, and world music, background. So his influences and his, musical ideas, if you're a rock player, his ideas are radically different than yours. I have seen Al in concert. I saw Al Di Meola back in 1994, and I was, I was young, and he played at the Vogue in Indianapolis, and I'll never forget. I was excited to see him. I had no idea what to expect. I'd kind of listened to his music, for a number of years, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go see this guy. And his band was phenomenal, and I remember he actually had a really cool light show too, which I wasn't expecting that. He had like laser lights and all this mood lighting and stuff, which was cool. And I also got to meet Al Di Meola actually last summer. I was at Sweetwater covering Gearfest for Guitar Player magazine. And I remember I went up a day early, and Nick Valcott, the famous, Grim Reaper guitarist and, author, for Guitar World, and he documented a lot of Dimebag's, techniques and music. And, Nick's kind of a legend, in the industry for sure. But Nick was taking me on a tour of Sweetwater, and it was the day before, Gearfest, so this was kind of off, off the clock or off the radar or whatever. And we made our rounds, and I spotted Al Di Meola and some other people, and I did a double take, and I thought, that's got to be Al Di Meola. I mean, he has a very distinct look. He had the sunglasses, kind of a vest, like a rain vest or something on. And I just spotted him. He stood out, from the pack of people that were there. And I was like, Nick, I think that's Al Di Meola. And Nick and I both kind of just did, double takes. And then we ran over there, like school kids. We were like, oh my gosh. And, we talked to him and shook his hand and, took some pictures. And then I also got to talk to his guitar tech. And Al and his band, I guess they played in Fort Wayne the night before, and they were just kind of hanging out, shopping. I saw he was like playing drums at one point, like in the drum room, and it was really weird to see Al Di Meola, behind a drum kit, but it was cool. And his guitar tech, handed out some picks, and we talked to him for a while too. But it was really cool. I thought, wow, I'm meeting, a legend of guitar. So really, I guess the big thing you're going to take away, from this lesson is just, different types of chords, a different approach to chords, and just some of these, unusual, textures and tonalities that you hear in his music, which is very different than most styles of music out there. And you will find, some of these chords, hiding in more accessible music, but it's usually refined like in, progressive rock or, alternative rock or something, a little bit different, or metal. You're not going to hear this, in a lot of pop music or, country music or folk music. It's more kind of the elite, styles like progressive rock or something like that. The first example is from the song Vertigo Shadow, and I really like this tune, and it has this haunting kind of quality with the chords. And it's really just cycling through this kind of picking pattern, and he's changing the root note, which obviously kind of influences and changes the sounds of these chords. So it starts with this like D minor add 9 add 11, and he's doing it like this. So he's got the 10th fret on the G, 8th fret on the B, and then a series of open strings. So he's grabbing the open D, the high E open, and then he plays the G and then plays the B. But it creates this very eerie sound. creates this weird, kind of haunting sound, and he's really just changing the root notes. He started with that D minor add 9 add 11, and then he's grabbing an A, and that would change it to an A7 flat 13. He grabs an F, and that would change it to an F major 7 sus2. And then he changes that to a C there on the low E string on the 8th fret, and that would change it to a C add 11. So he's really just keeping, that F and G note held down on the G and the B strings. And then, the open high E string stays open the whole time. But then, you're changing the root note, from D to A to F to C. So there's kind of this little bass line, in that chord progression. Which is really cool. From the same song, it kind of moves to a B flat sus2, and he does this kind of different picking pattern. And then it's going to move over to an A7 flat 13, and then he adds an E flat there, which would change it to an A7 flat 13 over E flat. And he also kind of drags or rakes his pick on that last chord, which gives it this very, mysterious sound. Now, something unusual that does pop up in a lot of his music is known as crossbarring, or kind of a diagonal bar. And you'll find this in a lot of, jazz, and you'll also see it in classical music. You don't see it a whole lot in rock, I think mainly because it's kind of different. It feels weird. It takes a little while to get used to it. So we're going to start, I'm just going to demonstrate it first, and then I'll relate it to an actual song. But if you think of a C major 7 chord, like a bar chord like this, all right, very traditional. But what we're going to do is actually, we're going to crossbar, or we're going to kind of have your finger, your index finger diagonally arranged where you're barring, you're grabbing the 3rd fret on the A, but then you're also allowing, that index finger to grab the 2nd fret on the high E. And that would transform that C major 7 to a C major 7 sharp 11. Like that. And I love the sound of those chords. Let's move it up to E and do the same thing there. Now you're going to, hold the 7th fret on the A, but then allow the bar with your index finger to drift over and grab the 6th fret on the high E. And that would be, E major 7 sharp 11. So for a song example, where you might find that in his music, in the song Vertigo Shadow, if we stick with that tune, you'll find an F major 7 sharp 11, played that way. And from that F major 7 sharp 11 shape, he just kind of scoots back a little bit and changes it to a B11. But I also like the fact he allows that open A to kind of ring in there, which is really unusual. I like that chord. The next example is really just an exotic scale exercise of mine. This isn't really from Aldi Meola, but it does kind of feature a lot of these, kind of flamenco, exotic, chords that you'll hear him use. And I'm really just sharing this. Basically, it's a great finger exercise because these kinds of chords, that you'll find in Al's music or in flamenco, and world music, Latin music, and classical music, of course, too. They're demanding. Like, you're going to use multiple fret hand fingers, if not all of your fret hand fingers. And the shapes are kind of unusual, and you'll feel like your fingers are kind of contorted, to reach some of these, fingerings and these sounds. But it basically starts off with this A sus2 flat 13, which is right here. You're holding the 7th fret on the D and the 10th fret on the G. Just strumming through it is, it sounds very mysterious and unusual. I like that sound for sure. But there's a little picking pattern. I'm kind of just playing leapfrog, really. And then I'm going to add the C there on the the 8th fret on the low E string, and that's going to change that to a C major 13. So after that, it's going to move to a B6 add 11. And then just basically open up the low E string, and it changes it to an E major 7. So This really is a great, picking and fingering exercise, and the complete exercise looks and sounds like this. Repeat the whole thing, but that's a killer little picking and fingering workout, especially for that poor little pinky, because I do kind of choose to use that pinky along the G string the whole time. Right, the next example comes from the song Perpetual Emotion, which is from his World Symphonia album, and this is a really interesting guitar part, chord sequence, and the picking pattern is really demanding too. And that's one thing, when you listen to Al Di Meola or watch him play, his right hand is a machine. He has all these interesting rhythms and accents, and he'll change where he picks, along the string, and produces all these textures and different sounds. For this song, he found a really unusual A7 voicing to start with. So it doesn't sound anything like a traditional A7. He's basically holding, the 7th fret there on the D and the 8th fret on the B, and that's A and G. And then he's using the open strings around that to kind of create this, really textured, kind of interesting A7. And then the picking pattern is interesting because it's following this kind of Latin, kind of a Latin-based rhythm. So it's a very unusual chord and an unusual rhythm pattern too. Basically extends down with his pinky and grabs, the 10th fret there on the low E string to grab that D note, and that's going to change it to a D sus2 sus4, and then it's going to change to a C note. So I'm just reaching over there with my 3rd finger to grab that C on the 8th fret, and then he repeats that pattern again. It's really, really cool. I like that. And the last example is from his famous Mediterranean Sundance, which is on the album Elegant Gypsy. And you can also find this on the historic, Friday Night in San Francisco live album too. But it's a very busy, it definitely has this kind of flamenco, kind of Latin kind of vibe and feel to it. I think the hardest part about that is he's kind of playing with like a A minor add 9, and then A minor, and then A minor 7, and then A minor. But you're, continuing this picking pattern. And then I think the hardest part is just cleanly getting that chord sequence, without buzzing strings, or you could probably hear a couple buzzes, when I played through it a second ago. So that's tricky. It doesn't look like, it would be that hard to play. And it doesn't really sound overly difficult. But then when you sit there and you actually try to play it, it's like, oh my gosh, that's kind of hard to do, cleanly. And then after he does that little A minor kind of walk down, then guess what happens? He's playing an E minor add 9, which how many times have we seen this chord, in Chordplay? That chord has appeared, numerous times. And here he's really just kind of picking through it. Kind of slows down there at the end. And then on Elegant Gypsy, you'll hear him just strum just once on the top part of that chord, and he kind of mutes it. And then when you hear Friday Night in San Francisco and other live versions of the song, he started doing this kind of flamenco pick kind of strum thing. This look at the chords of Al Di Meola, and leave some comments and feedback, and please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back with some more lessons and material very soon. Thank you.